What's up, all you Cape Crusaders? Welcome to episode 96, which means there's only 4 episodes left until episode 100 of a show that is completely dedicated to going out of bounds in video games, with the goal of finding and explaining developer techniques, or in some cases like today, unused content. So while this camera did exist at one point before, it wasn't really working right. And once again, we gotta thank Codename Gamma for fixing this camera. If you wanna check out some of his videos or have a link to the camera itself, Gamma's gonna be your source, and I'll leave links to all that down below. But seriously, I have an awesome episode for you guys this week, so let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is Joker in the Incinerator. This scene has a very controlled camera, and so as a lot of you longtime viewers know, these sort of areas are the most fun to check out. Because when the developers have a very controlled space, they tend to leave a lot of mess outside of the boundaries. Like for example here, you can see that there's a giant wide rectangle that's overcompensated for the floor for Joker, and on any other side of this environment it's completely untextured. Well, it would be untextured, but because this game is running an Unreal Engine, everything that goes untextured is replaced with a dev texture. And for whatever reason, over next to Joker is a very small, low textured skybox. And naturally, this is something that has a little bit of mystery to it, so I had to ask my anonymous developer source what they thought this might have been for. And the answer that I got was, of course, there's going to be a multitude of possible answers, but the one that they thought was the most likely is that they were just using this area to test something out, and they left an object behind. I even asked if it was possible that it was tied to lighting in some way. They did humor the idea that there's a script tied to atmospheres, where you might need a sky dome in a level to receive lighting data, but reiterating that that's less likely. And the only reason why I even thought to ask that is because way above this little scene here is the overworld map. You can find the city completely rendered. However, once you get up there, the lighting is completely different from what it is in that room with the Joker. And one last thing I want to show you here before we move on, the texture that shows up in the intro scene where it shows the burning bat symbol, that all happens in real time right in front of the Joker's face. So just know that when you start up a new game of Arkham Knight and you see the logo appear, you can know in the back of your brain that the Joker is just literally right behind that texture. Alright, so the opening scene with the police officer, this is really cool. It's one of those scenes for the most part you're in first person, and the way they handle it in Arkham Knight is if the limbs are shown, then there are just disembodied limbs. However, they're not hiding anywhere when they're not being used. You just will see no character model whatsoever. And as for the diner itself, it's got some secrets of its own, because outside of some of these areas, there are unused rooms, and based off of the positioning, it looks like it could have been used at one point, but then was later covered up. But of course, there could be other reasons for this. Underneath the diner, though, there is some odd things going on down here. One of which is a couple of rectangle models that seem to have the Coke dispenser textures laid all over it. But what I find to be the most odd is that there's just a lone box that's not properly textured, but it looks like it was the texture that it was meant for, as the bump mapping on the top of the box seems to have some sort of ribbon, and if you look at the texture closely, it does look like it was supposed to be one. Actually, scratch that, little addendum here. The texture belongs to this separate ribbon over here that has a completely different design. Now, as far as I know, this is a completely unused object, which could have had a purpose at one point in time. In fact, the bow was reused in-game by the Joker Titan containers, just not the box itself. Now, over here we got Scarecrow trying to fit in with normal society. He's, well, good luck there, Scarecrow, you're doing your best. And we all know what happens when you go and bug Scarecrow. He releases his fear toxin, which starts the hallucination scene for the officer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put the camera over in the corner so that you can see the transition without any obstructions. And you'll notice that all the people inside the diner seem to disappear. The Scarecrow has an animation that was done by the mocap department that awkwardly walks through some of the booths. And then after it's all said and done, it's replaced with all the hallucinations, which I hope you agree is rather precious. So let's take a look at the very first, what happens to the character off-screen moment, which I'm sure you know that in Batman Arkham Knight there are a ton of these moments. Well anyways, the first one I want to show you here is with Poison Ivy. There's a scene where Ivy's plants grab Batman and he flies up. And then Poison Ivy goes into the elevator and the elevator is supposed to go down. Two things of interest to know here. First is this is where Batman ends up. He just kind of hangs in the sky until he's called into the scene at the bottom of the building. The other thing is she doesn't actually go down the building, surprisingly. She stays in place and the elevator shaft goes up into the sky to give the effect that it looks like it's going down. and then all the characters just suddenly warp at the bottom of the building. Also, Ivy's going to answer the question for us of what happens to the characters when you put them into the back of the Batmobile. And the answer for every single character is this. The character first disappears, then the interior of the Batmobile changes as well into what it normally is when Batman's driving around in it.
Activate the Batmobile weapon diagnostics. It's time to go to war.
What about things underneath the map? Now, we talked about one or two things already, but because this game is so packed full of interesting stuff to show, it's kind of important to just lump things into categories. So with that said, here are the rest of the things that I managed to find underneath the map. One is this beat up car during one scene, which I'll be honest, I found to be the least interesting. Way more interesting than that would be this untextured cube that is shown at no matter what point you decide to go underneath the hub area of the game. There was also these low poly, low textured objects that almost look like manhole covers during a very specific time in the game, and I can't say confidently that it's attached to anything in specific. On the inside of the circle, it looks like it's just supposed to be the low textured version of the cliffs that are way off in the distance, and then inside is just a total mess with lots of geometry webbing itself inside of this object, as well as bright yellow textures in some areas too that I'm pretty sure represent lights. So with Batman Arkham Knight, it's crazy. There's so many scenes that rely on you not being able to move the camera wherever you want. The developers almost manipulate every single scene in the game to have something a little bit special with camera trickery going on. Even something as simple as this, like the Arkham Knight's cargo plane. If we move the camera inside, we can see all the soldiers and tanks just disappearing as they come inside. And I'm trying to keep this episode in chronological order, but here's another example where you can blow up all the cash that the Penguin has. And when you do, for some reason, it turns into a Titan container, which is kind of funny that it does anything at all because you're not allowed back inside of there to see what's going on. Here we go, our first encounter as Batman against the Scarecrow. And it starts off with him inside of this centerpiece room with nothing but his silhouette shown. And if we take the camera inside there to see what he's doing, it looks like interpretive dancing. I can't really say for sure. The free camera really doesn't pay any favors to Scarecrow, clearly. Though really cool, this is obviously something that the player was meant to see, except this is what it looks like without a silhouette, and I didn't even know about this. For a brief moment, the Scarecrow's head gets replaced with the Joker's. And when you finally confront Scarecrow, for a very brief moment, there's two of him. One is a stand-in for when you're approaching the room, and the other is a cinematic version of him. It becomes clear that the cinematic version is the one that's typing on the computer, as the other one disappears. And also, this is probably one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to cover this episode. There is that shocking reveal when you turn around and the Joker's there. One really interesting thing about this is that rather than just blip onto the screen like most things you'll see in this episode, Joker's very first appearance has this weird effect where it looks like paper burning but almost in reverse. This is something you totally can't see normally in game. And also when Batman wakes up and he sees Joker, taking the camera outside of its normal position can show you that Batman is floating above the ground.
Oh, don't act all surprised, Bats. You knew this was going to happen sooner or later. Me stuck deep inside you. Together.
Alright, let's start talking about the Gordons. After Batman passes out, there's a flashback scene with Commissioner Gordon. And the first thing that I noticed is that this is the only daytime scene in the entire game. And so I wanted to zoom the camera out to show you Gotham City during the day, but once you start panning the camera out far enough, all the lighting effects start to go away and it becomes a nighttime setting again. But that's alright, so when you go inside with Commissioner Gordon, it goes into first person mode. And the game is supposed to catch you off guard by turning around and seeing Batman right in front of your face. Panning the camera out though shows you something I never noticed before, which is that Batman shakes Commissioner Gordon's hand. The camera by default is pointed at Batman's face, so I've never noticed that detail before. So now let's move on to the other Gordon, Barbara. In this little hallucination scene, we get an unexpected visit from the Joker. And if we take the camera around the apartment, we can notice a couple of things. One is that the room that is never shown does have an empty space for it, and the only objects that are inside are just part of the hidden base inside the building that this hallucination scene sort of occupies inside of. One dead giveaway is a picture of Robin and Oracle, which is in the exact same position as it should be when the room returns to normal. The other thing I wanted to show you in the apartment was the Joker paying a visit from another angle. Doing this, you can see when he disappears and everything else. You can also notice that the elevator shaft remains relatively unchanged to assume the role of Barbara Gordon's apartment hallway. And lastly, for Barbara, there's this scene where she has a poor decision made during Batman's hallucination.
Barbara, it's me! Your friend.
get me.
And the developers cover it up by having the Joker walk in front of the frame. So looking at it from another angle, you can see that there's no animation between when she does the deed and when the player is shown the aftermath, which is sort of important to note because sometimes in games, developers will work in something last second to censor something. However, the fact that there's no animation here at all makes a very clear indication that this was an intention from the start.
Sir, what's happened?
She's gone, Alfred.
What do you mean?
Barbara.
Surprise! Here's a close-up of the Batman that the Scarecrow sees in his hallucination. Here's a couple fun things you'll find out of bounds. During the scenes with the Blimp, players know that at a certain point you have to tilt the entire Blimp to solve environment puzzles. Well, the fun truth to that is that it's really happening. If you take the camera way outside the Blimp, you can see the entire thing tilting. Granted, it's positioned in a way that it'll lean inside of buildings, but I mean, it's still cool to see the entire environment move at the player's command. Another thing here is a hidden message left by the developers for other developers. Towards the end of the game, you can find some textures out of bounds that reads, "Please update this shader to the new master shader." And so for layman's terms, for those who don't know, a shader is something that can add an effect to a texture. And when you have one shader that's good for the majority of the textures in the game, that ultimately becomes the master shader. And so at one point in development, they updated the master shader and left behind a message for other developers to update it to it. And over here, you have a completely unused asset. It appears to be a camera. And fans of my show will be pretty shocked to see that it's essentially the exact same camera that we used for the iconic Magic camera on the show Boundary Break. So I'm over here really hard trying not to call this the Magic camera. But yeah, seriously, there's cameras used in Arkham Knight, but none of them are the primitive version like this one here. So here's a few anomalies that I found inside of character models. Now, all character models overcompensate for what's underneath the clothing. You can let your imagination take over for what that means, but let me give you one example that's totally appropriate for this video. In the 1989 Batman costume, as well as the other costumes too, but with this one in particular, the entire head of Bruce Wayne is modeled underneath the cowl. And if we were to remove the cowl, you could technically see the black eye makeup that he's supposed to have when he takes off his cowl, but he never does, because you know, it would look lame, I guess. And it's just a shame that I wasn't able to get you a ripped model for this episode, because I would have shown you what that would have looked like without having to clip through the cowl with a camera. Also, Lucius has something really weird going on. On the inside of his face, each individual hair for his eyebrows has a white rectangle attached to it, making it look like he has post-it notes for eyebrows on the inside of his face. And it's the only character model in the game that has this feature, if you want to call it that. Alright, now let's wrap up by showing you some of the ending scenes of this game. The first of which I want to show you with the Joker while he's running around in Batman's subconscious. That one scene where he's shooting down the Batman statues and it gets really scary and creepy towards the end, well, every time the Joker's not looking at the statues are tracing his movements, which did absolutely nothing to make the scene any less creepy for me. Also, towards the end when Joker is being forced into a prison cell by Batman, there's another Joker stored just outside the boundaries that's meant to work as a battle model, and he's only called in as soon as Joker starts fighting. And all those jail cells that are hanging around Batman and Joker, they have stuff inside of them, surprisingly. Each of them has a bed, a toilet, and one book. And that book has legible text on it. It is excerpts from Phantom of the Opera. Also, this entire time, before the cutscene even plays, the Arkham Knight is stored way outside the boundaries in an A pose, which is much later called in for that one quick scene that he has at the end of the game. Hey, thanks very much for watching. I know that this episode came out a little bit late. I do apologize for that. The reason for that, of course, is because I'm in the middle of moving. As you can see, all of my gaming stuff is packed up and ready to go. I'm going to need another week to get through all of this. Honest to God, I'd rather be just making Boundary Break episodes, but unfortunately, people need a lot of my attention to get this whole thing settled, so my hands are kind of tied here. With that said, I noticed that YouTube's not really recommending my old videos to people, and I'm sure it's directly linked to the fact that I haven't been putting out episodes on that weekly schedule, so it's been kind of messing things up for me. If you could, it would really help me out if you watched an old episode. Again, if you leave a comment saying hey, I helped out, you're welcome, she says, or good luck or whatever, I will definitely leave a love on that comment for you. But like, you know, that's only if you can, if you have the time or whatever. But you know, outside of that, I should be able to get another episode out within 2 weeks, hopefully, because pretty much this next week, it's just going to be all getting the stuff moved in and getting internet set up. Hopefully that can happen within days and not like, you know, 4 days or whatever. Fingers crossed there. But so long as things go smoothly, 2 weeks for sure. And the next episode, I'll let you guys decide. You can comment down below which one you want, and the most upvoted game in the comment section will be the one that I'll try to cover, you know, so long as it's within my means. Again, well, episode 100 real soon. I'm really excited to show you guys what that's going to be. I don't think anyone's guessed what it is yet, so I can't wait to surprise you guys. But with that said, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and hopefully I'll see you again really soon. All right, take care.